Hi, everyone. Welcome. Tonight, I'm going to give a presentation on the Great Reset. And if I get through it quickly enough, I'll show how that ties a little bit into the Ukraine scenario.
That would be good.
Yes.
That would be great.
Well, good. Everyone likes that. And Bill is going to do another one of his presentations on prepping. What's your topic today?
The pillars of prepping.
The pillars of prepping, he says.
It's a good one.
Right. So let's get this thing rolling. I'm going to presume that everybody has at least heard of the Great Reset.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm not going to go through, this is going to be elementary level. I'm going to assume we got a little bit of knowledge in it. Start with, from the Declaration of Independence, they talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it's a phrase that gives three examples of the inalienable rights which the Declaration says have been given to all humans by their creator, and which the governments are created to protect. It's a fundamental question that what the Great Reset is all about, is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, I personally, as much a fan as I am of Thomas Jefferson, I wish he would have stuck with the original that John Locke said, which is life, liberty, and property. And as we go through this presentation, you'll understand why the difference between property and pursuit of happiness is a big deal. There's two types of people in this world. Well, there's a lot of different ways to break up people. But when it comes to the topic today, you've got two types of people. You've got ones who believe in life, liberty, and property. And when you accept natural rights and that you want to be left alone, that comes with an unwritten contract. That means you have to respect the rights of others. Otherwise, it does not work. If I respect your rights and you respect mine, we've got a very successful. There's other types of people, and they're not necessarily evil people, but they want to tell other people what to do.
Not to interrupt, I just have a question.
Yes.
That unwritten contract, or well, I can't remember the exact verbiage you used. Is there a word in the English dictionary that defines that? Makes sense.
Let me work on that.
Yeah.
Let me work on
You
that.
know what? I think there should be.
If there's not, we'll come up with one.
I already got it.
Q&As later. Adoption of these ideals, the people that other people want to impose their ideas on everyone else. This is basically a collectivist. What we see that big government wants to do is that people that want to tell you how to live, and we're just the opposite. We want to be left alone, and that's the fundamental question we're going to be talking about tonight. Adoption of our ideals back in 1776 led to the greatest economic explosion in history, and it's not perfect because humans aren't perfect. But its position as the most successful form of government probably ought to make a rational person pause before throwing it away in some totalitarian reset. Our system is far from perfect, but look from where we came from 1776, 13 small little colonies, to the most powerful economic engine in the history of mankind. We've done more in the last 200 years. We've reduced poverty. We've been to the moon, probably. So what is the Great Reset? Great Reset is many things. What it isn't is a conspiracy theory. This is very real, and it's imminent. It's upon us. How do we know it's real? Well, Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, wrote a book in 2020 called The Great Reset. This COVID-19, The Great Reset. The first Great Reset book he wrote was 10 years before. But this is very, very real. We know this because the way he developed the World Economic Forum was to create a whole bunch of people called the Global Young Leaders and the Global Young, I think it was Influencers, which is another 4,000 or 5,000 people. But these are pretty influential people, people who went to the top schools, Ivy League schools, came from the right families. You're talking about the elites of the world. They go hang out, with the World Economic Forum, and they get indoctrinated into this Great Reset mentality. And then they run off and they infiltrate our schools, our political offices, our corporations, and that's what got us here today. Just show you how effective they've been. I'm not going to go through it. I got 3 pages of list of some of the more notable alumni of the Young Global Leaders. And I'm just going to go through some ones that we all know as household names. Since we're in California, the first one I'll give you is Gavin Newsom in 2005. Pete Buttigieg.
Oh, yeah.
2019, or sorry, 2005 also. Chelsea Clinton.
Oh, my God.
Huma Abedin. Nikki Haley. Oh yeah, she was. Oh yeah.
Never liked her.
Oh yeah. Samantha Power, not a surprise. Jonathan Soros, son of George.
Oh, my God.
Paul Krugman,
Easy,
That's an easy one.
Krugman's New York Times, right?
Krugman, New York Times economist, Nobel Prize winner. The guy hasn't been right in the 20 years I've been following him. He's been wrong on every
I
single
remember
thing.
what he said about Trump.
Larry Summers, anybody remember him? Oh yeah, he was one of the big global bankers back in Bush and Clinton days. Black Lives co-founder Alicia Garza. So from the media, we've got some fun ones. We got Leanna Wen, flip-flopped again.
Oh, the doctor.
She flip-flopped again today. More stuff that 6 months ago would have gotten us kicked off of social media. She's coming out and saying, oh, masks don't work or lockdowns didn't work.
Oh,
But yeah, thanks. Where were you 6 months, 2 years ago? More from the media. Sanjay Gupta,
oh,
Andrew Ross Sorkin, Thomas Friedman, George Stephanopoulos.
oh.
Oh, here's a fun one. Lachlan Murdoch, who's going to inherit Fox News. There's more.
Oh, it's already gone.
From technology and social media, here's some fun ones. We've got Bill Gates,
Oh, yeah.
Steve Ballmer, Jeff Bezos. All the big names in tech are part of this, which should tell you quite a bit. Sergey Brin and Larry Page, the Google co-founders. Google CEO, former Google CEO Eric Schmidt. Wikipedia co-founder Jimmy Wales. PayPal co-founder Peter Thiel. And a little FYI, Peter Thiel is an investor in Rumble. So I use Rumble, you know, and so far so good. They've been free speech, but I'm keeping an eye on them for that reason. eBay co-founder Pierre Omidyar, Mark Zuckerberg, and of course, Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg. So this is not just an American phenomenon. Former British prime ministers Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. Oh, here's some fun ones from the European Council on Foreign Relations. We've got Lynn Forrester de Rothschild. We've also got Nathaniel Rothschild. Historian Niall Ferguson, one of my favorites. Some more. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, thank you. One who's been in the news lately, Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada. Of course, Justin Trudeau was one of them. And let's close up with Angela Merkel.
How about Iceland, the prime minister? I'm sure he's.
It might be on here, but didn't make my list.
Okay.
A few more internationally. You've got Jose Manuel Barroso, who's an EU commissioner. Jean-Claude Juncker, same position. Former French presidents Emmanuel Macron and Nicolas Sarkozy.
He's the current president.
Oh, current Emmanuel Macron and former Nicolas Sarkozy. Thank you for the correction from the French gal in the crowd.
Unfortunately, he's gonna make life really hard because they're not vaccinated. He's a tyrant. Same thing as Canada.
Of course he is. But where did he get it from? And the last one on there was, of course, Angela Merkel. Of course, that comes as no shock to anybody. Anyway, so that's what that's basically how they got to where they are, or the World Economic Forum got to this point. These are very, very influential people. Yes.
Another very, very influential person is Putin.
You know, so from the crowd,
He's on that list.
so Vladimir Putin was mentioned. Yes and no. He's listed on the World Economic
I
Forum.
mean, he's by.
He's listed on the World Economic Forum's webpage with a picture of him, but he's not listed as a young global leader. So he has some connection with him.
Older than 50 or something.
Well, it's part of it has to do with age, but no, he was actually 2 years too old when they started doing this program. That's one of the reasons they think.
Actually, if you listen to the High Wire, Big Trade today, he has a little 5-minute thing about Putin and actually gives video of him talking and relating with Mr. W.E.B. World Economic Forum, Carl.
Yeah, so Putin's got some connection, but I don't think he's not a young global leader, so that's why I didn't list him. But obviously Putin's part of this conversation. And when we get to the Ukraine stuff, there's a lot of the speculation with Putin is, you know, is he part of this big globalist movement, or is he wearing a white hat, or is he just a nationalist for Russia? And the answer is we don't know. His actions have not given us a definitive answer one way or the other. Yeah.
My last guess is the nationalist for Russia. That's my theory. Was it Dan Crenshaw on that list?
Dan Crenshaw is a young global leader. He didn't make the one I printed out, but yes, Dan Crenshaw is one of them without a doubt. There's more American ones, but
All the leaders are part like the G7, G9, I mean, I can't remember the numbers right now, but basically when they have the summits all over Europe, when they meet,
Yeah,
they all guilty of it.
yeah,
So
and
part of
they fly in on their limousines and, you know, the rank and file, you know, the huddled masses don't get to talk to them. This is basically the old nobility get together to plan our futures. And what do they say? These are people who want to tell other people how to live.
But
They-
you're gonna have nothing and you're gonna be happy.
Well, we're gonna, that's coming up.
And you're gonna be a stakeholder.
We're getting to that too.
Mm.
You know, that's really the big picture here. So there's a really interesting quote about the Great Reset, and I wanted to bring this one up early because these people are not necessarily evil. They very likely, some of them or many of them think they're actually doing good. They just bought into what is good and they didn't get that fundamental lesson about letting other people live their lives the way they want. They're not necessarily evil. And I bring that up because we all know people in our lives, our families and friends that, you know, they've fallen for this globalist mentality, and it doesn't make them evil or bad or anything like that. It just means they're mistaken or they have a different idea. You know,
Misleader.
we're gonna have to cut the questions down, otherwise we're gonna be here all night long. So we'll do Q&A every once in a while, but if you don't mind, unless it's really important.
No, it's just, well, it is kind of like the American citizens that are students in the US and now are in Europe in the schools, because it is recognized in documentation that they get in the American school system.
So our young lady from France tells us American students cannot go to some or all schools in Europe,
Just in general, they are being turned down in masses because of that.
applying to colleges.
Mhm.
Yeah, American students are being turned down in European colleges because our students are too indoctrinated.
If I'm wrong,
All right, we'll have plenty of time for questions, but let me start getting on a roll here because I got a lot of stuff to cover. Guy by the name of Isaiah Nah, and if you don't know the name, I didn't either, but he had a really interesting quote. The Great Reset is the complete overhaul of every facet of human life as we know it. It is appealing to so many well-intended people because it is true that the system in place is monstrous in some ways. However, what they're proposing is a solution for them and a behavioral modification program for the rest of us. I like the quote. How are they doing this and trying to implement it? It comes down to the Hegelian dialectic, which you've heard Doug and I talk about quite a bit. Hegel was a philosopher, writer in the 16th, 17th centuries, and he was a big influence on some people like Marx and Engels and stuff like that. But the Hegelian dialectic is basically a thesis, antithesis, solution. And the way to say it is manufacture a crisis. Come in there as the government, seize power, you know, make the crisis go away, and then hold on to that power. And that's basically how they've done a slow walk through the institutions. It's a fundamental concept for communism, but I'm not going to call these. There is some similarities between global communism and the World Economic Forum, and we're going to get to that. But it's not. There's shades of gray in there. The big one that these guys have always been trying to, use to scare the population so they could take power of was of course global warming. You know, man, bear, pig.
Oh,
Yeah, it gets interesting, but it really is a manufactured crisis that requires a huge government overreach. And, they wanted to use they've been planning it for decades to use the World Economic Forum Great Reset using global warming. Problem is it stopped getting warm for about 20 years and they had a little bit of an issue. But it's the exact same playbook they had used in global warming that they used in COVID. And now that COVID appears to be petering out, and it is. I made the prediction a week or two ago on our podcast that they're going to replace that with, they're going to go back to climate crisis. And right on cue this weekend, John Kerry has scheduled a quote unquote emergency crisis meeting. I'm sorry, climate emergency meeting. Where's the emergency in climate? Did it rain this week or something? I mean, did someone get wet? Anyway, so that's what we're going to hear a lot more about the climate crisis, and that's going to be a big part of this presentation.
that's why you hear a lot about Leonardo DiCaprio and the global warming, because he is part of the graduation.
No, I might have had him on the list. I didn't circle him though. But talk about Leonardo DiCaprio being a big part of this. Klaus Schwab wrote in 2020, the past 5 centuries in Europe and America have taught us anything, if the past 5 years, it is that acute crises contribute to boosting the power of the state It's always been the case, and there's no reason it should be different with the COVID-19 pandemic. He may not have planned it, he may not have helped plan the pandemic, or he might have, I don't know. I don't have any information that he did, but he sure as heck wanted to take advantage of it. And of course, we all remember, never let a crisis go to waste.
Yeah.
You know, that was former Obama Chief of Staff and Mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, made that one famous. But at the end of the day, they have to keep people scared. The government can't have power. The people will accept government overreach if they're scared. They want to be protected. And as the great Tom McDonald said, anyone know who Tom McDonald is?
Yes, I love him.
Tom McDonald is a rapper from Canada. And one of his favorite lines is, I think the elites are real, but they're not drinking baby's blood. Some people would debate that part. They're creating crisis so they have something to save you from. And this crisis wasn't where they're creating something. Anyways, that's the whole idea. They create a problem and save you from it. Keep the population scared. And they've been doing it for a long time in America. I mean, you had the, during the Cold War, we had to worry about nuclear winter. And we'll go through some of this other stuff. So I'm going to go through the timeline of how they got from where the World Economic Forum got to where they started to how they got to where we are today. And you're going to start seeing a lot of connections. I am going to skip over some of the development and funding of the COVID virus, even though that is part of the story. This would go way too long if I got to know all that Peter Daszak stuff. So we're going to skip that. First date to remember is 1968. The book, The Population Bomb, is written by Paul Ehrlich. And he predicted a worldwide famine in the 70s and 80s due to overpopulation. That started a whole trend of doom and gloom books that got people very, very scared. The politicians latched onto this, and they've been trying to keep us scared of this. The world's going to cool, the world's going to heat. We got too many people. We've got peak oil. Anybody know the first time anybody wrote about peak oil? It was in the 1870s when Rockefeller was just getting started. He said, we're going to run out of oil. It's a crazy business model. That one didn't work out too well, Mr. Ehrlich's ancestor. Next date, 1971. Klaus Schwab funds the World Economic Forum. He writes his first book, Modern Enterprise Management and Mechanical Engineering, which somehow has to do with what we're talking about. It's where he introduces the idea of what's called stakeholder capitalism. This is a real big concept in the World Economic Forum, the Great Reset. If I own a corporation and I've got shareholders, they've got an equity investment in my company, right? I don't owe anything to the people in my community. My whole job is to create a good and service. If they like it, they will buy it. That's like life, liberty, and property. When we bring pursuit of happiness in there, it opens the door to stakeholders. We have to make sure everybody in the community is served by your company. Well, that's not free market capitalism. We'll get to what it's called later, but that all started in 1971. And to put that into perspective, last I checked, it's 2022. That means this guy's been at it with World Economic Forum stuff for 51 years, which means he started very young. And there's still questions about where he got the money and the standing to get all these corporations, all the people. One of the things he wrote was, management of a modern enterprise must serve not only shareholders, but all stakeholders to achieve long-term growth and prosperity. All right, next date on here is also 1971. Possibly related, I think it is. Make up your own mind. 1971, the United States ping pong team travels to China. No American had been to China since like 1949. This is a huge, huge event in US-China relations. Later in 71, Secretary of State Kissinger makes a secret trip to China. They were trying to negotiate. China was trying to get a United Nations resolution done that basically made it so no one else in the world could recognize Taiwan as a separate country. It's called the One China policy. It's the One China rule regulation. 72, Nixon becomes the first American president to visit China to quote unquote normalize relations. It's called the Shanghai Communique. 1973, the Trilateral Commission is founded by David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski. This is possibly related to all of this stuff, but Rockefeller at the time was the chairman of the Council of Foreign Relations. And there's a bunch of these different NGOs and acronym think tanks and stuff like that around the world, but they all talk to each other. Brookings Institute, Atlantic Council, all these. The CFR, which was founded in 1921 by the same people that founded the Federal Reserve Bank. So you know how I feel about them. Anyways, so Rockefeller's the chairman of the CFR. it was created to foster better relations between the United States, Europe, and Japan, which wasn't really a crying need. And they really got out of their lane quickly. Some quotes. In July 72, Rockefeller called its first meeting, which was held at Rockefeller's compound, blah, blah, blah. It was attended by about 250 individuals who were carefully selected and screened and represented the very elite of finance and industry. I mean, they've been doing this stuff a long time. A Trilateral Commission task report presented in 1975 meeting in Kyoto, Japan, called, quote, an outline for remaking world trade and finance, said, close trilateral cooperation in keeping the peace and managing the world economy and in fostering economic development and in alleviating world poverty will improve the chances of a smooth and peaceful evolution of the global system. So they're talking globalism and all that stuff way back even then. More dates. That's why I connected Trilateral Commission with the World Economic Forum, because they're using the exact same language with the exact same goals. You know, it's just different flavors of the same ice cream. I don't know. 75, President George H.W. Bush. It's a fun one. I talked about this when I was doing the American Fascist presentation about the Bush family history. George H.W. Bush was the United States' second envoy to China. President Bush regarded the U.S.-China relationship as the most important bilateral relationship in the world. He viewed China's development as beneficial and not harmful to the United States, and he emphatically rejected the idea that China is an adversary to the United States. So that's Bush who gave us that foreign policy in 1975. What else did he do then is he became the gatekeeper for any U.S. business, any U.S. company that wanted to do business in China. And the reason these businesses wanted to go to China, and this is part of the great plan, we're seeing it revealed, is we've got all the technology and financial wherewithal, but what we don't have is cheap labor. Well, they did, and that was the trade. So these U.S. corporations, these multinational corporations, enriched themselves for the last 4 or 5 decades on cheap Chinese labor and cheap credit over here. And that's how they got the wealth and the power, so that they're basically demigods right now. They're a separate class of people. You know, they've got these multinational corporations are more powerful than all but about 3 or 4 countries in the world. And they got that way through the China trade. Side note, it comes up a couple times here. In 77, that same George H.W. Bush became the director of the CIA. And that was also just shortly before the Iran hostage crisis. 1977, the Time magazine cover reads, "The Big Freeze, predicting global cooling." Anybody remember that one? That was the next way they were going to scare us.
National Geographic followed suit.
1980, we don't know who did this, but someone did it and spent a lot of money doing it. And they built the Georgia Guidestones in Georgia. And these are monolithic, really well put together. I don't know what to call it, Guidestones. But they had 10 commandments on them. And some of these are going to start to sound very familiar. I think it's connected, but nobody knows who actually paid for these, so I can't say that definitively. Their first one, and this is the one that ought to make everybody stand up and pay attention. They want to maintain humanity under 500 million people in perpetual balance with nature. The problem with that sentence is you can't maintain something at a certain level if it's at a higher level. So you've got to do something to reduce the level to that number you wanted. I've got a bit of a problem with that because I've read about the eugenicists, and a lot of them are the same people that are communists and globalists. You know, we've heard that. They want to guide reproduction wisely. Sounds like Planned Parenthood to me. You know, I think, you know, if you're a free person and you want to have a family, you should be able to have as many kids as you want and can afford. Yeah, who wants to live in a world where you get told you can only have 2.2 kids? They want to unite humanity with a living new language. Well, they've been doing that. They stole the word democracy. They stole the word liberal. They've been changing the whole language the whole time. But they're talking about something much greater. They want to rule passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason. That's an interesting concept on the Guidestones, because that comes straight out of the work of Adam Weishaupt, who was the founder of the Illuminati. It's all about tempered reason. Yeah. Protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts. That's where you get the world court, world legal system. Let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court. Same one, a little bit of overlap there. Is that different than the Republican system of government? It's, you know, we had each individual states that do everything internally and we had one federal government. Is this any different? It is in many ways, but that's almost a whole lecture in and of itself. Avoid petty laws and useless officials. Well, I'm okay with both of those. Balance personal rights with social duties. I don't think we have duties. You know, we don't have very many. Prize truth, beauty, love, seeking harmony with the infinite. Who's defining the infinite? But like I said, these are not all evil sounding things. This is just people who have a warped sense of, you know, what individual rights ought to be and their importance in changing those. Be not a cancer on earth. Leave room for nature. Leave room for nature. That's the last one. This comes down to that whole idea that came out of the came out of the 70s that the world's dystopian place. I mean, I grew up watching the Super Friends cartoons, and every villain ended up, you know, just being a complete environmental polluter. And we've had years and years of these movies where the bad guy is all these big polluters and stuff like that. And we've, you know, we've seen, you know, movies of how we cause global warming. And what was the one that where New York City got all iced over and the tidal wave hit? They keep showing over. And I think Hollywood has been in on this forever. They've been scaring people with just what a dystopian nightmare. And I'm an environmentalist, and I have been my whole life. And I forgot to put this one in here in the 70s, but I better jump. This one's important. Right during the same time period, Nixon, when he took us off the gold standard, well, they also confiscated a bunch of land for the federal government from states. And what that did is it launched the environmental movement. And the environmental movement, you know, they started out as being global cooler people. Now they became global warming. But you know who these foot soldiers are? You know, the Greenpeace people, the global warming people. These have been the globalist foot soldiers for 40 years, and they've done a great job of indoctrinating them. There's a reason they've been as effective as they are.
The Hollywood thing is the predictive changing for people.
Yeah.
And they're programming people from the youth.
Oh, so she says it's predictive and programming stuff. Yeah, it's also normalizing it too. You know, when, you know, it's all right, let's keep going. 1988 is an important year. We had the hottest summer on record. This started the global warming craze. 1989, because of that, the IPCC was formed. Anybody know what the IPCC is? This is the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They are the ones, the scientists, that decide which science gets printed, what's the truth and what it isn't. About every 4 or 5 years, they come up with an IPCC report. And you don't want to read the final report. What you want to do is get the 400 or 500 pages of abstracts, and you can see all the pieces that were submitted by legitimate scientists that were rejected for the final. And the final report is basically, it's absolutely, it's brutal science. They edit what they want in and out, and they just, it becomes propaganda very, very quickly. So the IPCC is very important. 1992, that's where it really gets going. The United Nations Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit. And that's where a Canadian gentleman by the name of Maurice Strong made his money in oil and gas, became the father of the IPCC and the whole global warming movement. And most people don't even know his name, but he's the guy, Maurice Strong. I think he had to end up the last few years of his life living in China. I'm not sure the whole story on that, but he did pass away a couple of years ago, and I had a drink. And I don't do that very often. I'm not a morbid person. Maurice Strong is not a guy I was a fan of. The Rio Declaration on Environmental and Development sets out 27 principles to guide the behavior of nations toward more environmentally sustainable patterns of development, and Agenda 21 is the result. Agenda 21 is a good one. 1997, we get the first global agreement to reduce greenhouse gases. The Kyoto Protocol was adopted. I don't want to really get into the greenhouse gas theory, but in a nutshell, the reason I am what they would call a global warming denier is because I think as a species, we're in the infancy of our understanding of what actually moves our climate. These climate science models that they keep using, and they keep being proven wrong decade after decade, they're all focused on greenhouse gases. And they're completely ignoring things that we now know impact our environment, like cosmic rays and solar flares. How can you have a model that leaves out two of the biggest inputs? It becomes useless. Your margin for error is so great, you could have 100 degrees either direction. So any of those models that can be thrown out. And because I'm a big fan of statistical modeling, I started looking at how they do this stuff. And you know, but the one that really got me was in 2009. Anybody heard of ClimateGate? So in 2009, at the University of East Anglia in England, this is one of the big climate research, universities. Somebody leaked a whole bunch of emails from all these climate scientists. And they were emailing back and forth with each other. And they weren't emailing about science. They were emailing about how to trick everyone. One of the famous quotes is how to use Michael Mann, that's the University of Pennsylvania guy, how to use his nature trick. And that's the guy who came up with the hockey stick theory, which has been totally debunked. Again, it's statistical malpractice. So I started, when those emails broke in 2009, I spent a whole weekend reading every single one of those emails, and I couldn't believe how bad these scientists were lying. And that they were talking about lying. How can you fool the public? We can't tell that, the data is not supporting our theories. What do? Well, we'll just change the data. And that's the people we're dealing with. And that's when I became a total, before that, I was as big of an environmentalist as anybody. My mom tells me I used to give half my allowance to Greenpeace, but I think that was just a trick to cut the allowance. Mom would do that. Back to the Kyoto Protocol, signed by President Bill Clinton, calling for the reducing the emission of 6 greenhouse gases in 41 countries and to reduce all their gas, just a bunch of made up mumbo jumbo if the theory is not sound. At the end of the day, talking about global warming, and I'm still in this for a guy by the name of Lawrence Spivak that Doug and I met a couple weeks ago at a luncheon. But he says, 2 million years ago, there was X number of carbon atoms on the planet and X number of oxygen atoms on the planet. And he goes, we have just about the exact same amount today. All we do is it just changes form a little bit. So, carbon's got an interesting lifestyle. Plants kick out carbon, goes into the, I think he talks about water. I'm not going to do a whole Lawrence Spivak thing. He's great. At the end of the day, we have a closed system. We're all carbon-based life forms. I mean, this whole theory, it's bunk. And how we have a uniparty. You find the entire Republican Party is giving in on the narrative that, that there is climate change. No, the climate changes. It's called weather.
Then they can barely predict that.
Was the whole idea too, they're utilizing now, like stop eating the meat, and then they're trying to make the population weaker, and then they're trying to remove the cars from the solar. I mean, it's all the junk, it's just pushing the agenda to sell products they want and then make the people weaker.
And I agree with everything you just said. I would agree with all of that. Talk about how, fast forward to the year 2000, then President Bill Clinton delivered his most persuasive pitch to Washington's foreign policy elite, Congress, and the international community on the merits of China's accession to the World Trade Organization. 2001, China joins the World Trade Organization under Bush. I bring this up. China's a big part of this picture, but also if you've got a Democratic president who does all the negotiation to bring China into the WTO, and then you've got a Republican president comes in and just rubber stamps it, don't tell me there's not a uniparty, that it's not a globalist uniparty. I mean, that's a clear-cut example of an issue that probably should have had some debate. It's not just a handoff. 2002, Bush grants permanent normal trading relations to China. Okay, that's a big one. 2006, Al Gore writes an inconvenient truth. That's a big moment because it got read by a lot of people. Yeah. It turns out a lot of the anecdotal evidence he was using to support global warming, almost every single one of them has been debunked. Turns out polar bears can actually swim. They like that. They spend a lot of their time in the water. Polar bear population in northern Canada and Alaska is at an all-time high right now. Okay. I can go through that whole book and debunk all of them. It's fun, but I like that. Turns out polar bears can swim. In 2010, here's where it gets fun. The Rockefeller Institute does Operation Lockstep. It's just a think tank operation. They hypothesize a simulated global outbreak, required steps, various phases, overall timelines, and expected outcomes. They were game planning a pandemic in 2010. And this is the same Rockefeller who helped co-found the FDA in 1913, also invested so much money in all the medical schools at the time that his monopoly on petroleum-based pharmaceuticals made him a bloody fortune. Yeah, he's the one who killed off holistic medicine. In 2010, the book The Great Reset was written by an American urban studies scholar named Richard Florida. He wrote it in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis and argued that the 2008 economic crash was the latest in a series of great resets, including anyone ever heard of this one? The Long Depression from the 1870s. That's a really fun story, the Long Depression. The Great Depression of the 30s, which he defined as periods of paradigm shifting systemic innovation. So you crash the system, you can make changes. That's the theory there. That's where the name, The Great Reset came from, was that book. 2010, Bill Gates gives his infamous TED Talk on depopulation, where he wanted to get us down to about 1.05 billion. This is not a man I want involved with reproduction or medicine, because he wants to kill off 6 out of 7. 2014, at the annual meeting at the World Economic Forum, Schwab declared, what we want to do in Davos this year, because they always meet in Davos, Switzerland, is to push the reset button. And subsequently, the image of a reset button would appear on the WEF's website. Go to the WEF's website and you will see that reset button. They are drilling that into everyone's head.
Build Back Better, isn't that?
That came later.
It's all connected.
Part of that one. That was a new one. Talking about Build Back Better. 2015, the Paris Climate Agreement is signed by 197 countries. I think the Kyoto Protocol only had about 130 something. In 2015, the United Nations comes out with a new version of Agenda 21 called Agenda 2030. The difference is they add, one of the biggest differences they added was a depopulation goal. And for those, depopulation basically means killing some of us, and someone gets to decide who gets to live and who gets to die, and I don't like that. 2017, the World Economic Forum published a paper entitled, "We need to reset the global operating system to achieve the UN's Sustainable Development Goals." 2019, the World Economic Forum signed a memorandum of understanding with the United Nations to form a partnership to advance the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So now we've got the United Nations, working with the World Economic Forum, the Council of Foreign Relations, it's pretty expensive rent there. Oops, 2018, I missed one. The World Economic Forum collaborated. Now here it gets fun. In 2018, the World Economic Forum collaborated with Johns Hopkins Health Center to conduct what was called CLADE-X. This is a simulation of a national pandemic response. Specifically, the exercise simulated the outbreak of a novel strain of human para-influenza virus. Sounds familiar. With genetic elements of the Nipah virus called CLADE-X. Nipah is supposed to be really scary. It's like 30 or 40% mortality rate, and it exists, and they are experimenting on it. And it is something to be very scared about. Dan Bongino was the one that brought that to my attention, did a good job on it. The simulation ended with a news report stating that in the face of CLADE-X, without effective vaccines, experts tell us that we could eventually see 30 to 40 million deaths in the US and more than 900 million around the world, 12% of the global population. Clearly preparation for a global world order, for global pandemic was in order. October 2019, 1 year later, basically 2 months before the pandemic starts. The World Economic Forum again collaborated with Johns Hopkins and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on another pandemic exercise, Event 201, which simulated an international response to the outbreak of a novel coronavirus. This was 2 months before the COVID outbreak in China became news and 5 months before the WHO declared it a pandemic. And it closely resembled the future COVID scenario, including incorporating the idea of asymptomatic spread, which has never been proven. Without asymptomatic spread, they never could have justified masks or lockdowns. You know, if we went by all the science we knew before 2019, we would have protected the vulnerable. You don't quarantine the healthy. That's not the way it works.
And if we could use the ivermectin, everything.
Yeah, and early treatment. We knew that early on. We also knew it was probably a bad idea to put sick people in old folks' homes.
That was by design though.
Of course it was, because it only happened in certain states and we know what they were.
When the word asymptomatic means that you have no symptoms, how do people say you have no symptoms?
Yeah, it's the only virus in the world where you have to take a test to know that you have it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the test is not, we don't need to go there. This isn't going on YouTube anyways, because my videos would last 2 minutes with theirs. So there's a gentleman by the name of Michael Rechtenwald, and he wrote a wonderful article. I use a lot of his source material on here. I'm going to quote him right now. He works for American Scholars. He's the chief academic officer And he also does a lot of work with, what is that university that does a lot of the good, Hillsdale, thank you very much. Yeah, this, Richtenwald has a video on Hillsdale site, that talks about the same stuff, and I think he's fantastic. He's very well sourced. Anyways, he wrote, this is a quote from Richtenwald. The CLADEX and Event 201 simulations anticipated almost every eventuality of the actual COVID crisis, most notably the responses by governments, health agencies, the media, tech companies, and elements of the public. Gee, I wonder how that happened. Maybe somebody was orchestrating it, giving orders from on high. The responses and their effects included worldwide lockdowns, you know all this stuff, the flooding of social media legacy with authoritative sources, widespread riots, media censorship to combat misinformation, widespread riots and mass unemployment. December 19th, the first official COVID case is reported in China. Probably started a couple months before that. A lot of people are starting to think that it was had something to do with the military exercises over in China 2 months prior. America was doing military stuff over there. And if you remember, China actually accused the US of starting the pandemic. Well, now that we know about Peter Daszak, EcoHealth Alliance, and Dr. Fauci funding the virus, I don't know what's true or not. I think it was a collaboration, which I think this whole thing was. So pointing fingers isn't going to do much good for anyone because they're pointing ahead and shudder. You know, it's a Spider-Man meme. What's that? You can ask a question.
So this morning I read on Telegram that there are bioweapons labs in Ukraine, and that's part of like Putin's movie. Do you think that's true?
Hold that one until we get to the Ukraine stuff. I will address that.
One thing to note, though, which is interesting, is that back in 2019, about all the military, like the Marines in particular, were getting rid of all the tanks. They were purchased by the army and other things. Why would they get rid of the tanks? There's a lot of things that are interesting.
Yeah, this is coordinated. June 2020, at its 50th annual meeting, the WF announced the Great Reset's official launch. Okay. And a month later, Schwab published a book with a guy named Mailerat, who posted a book on COVID-19, the Great Reset. The book declared that COVID represents an opportunity that can be seized, that we should take advantage of this unprecedented opportunity to reimagine our world. Never let a crisis go to waste. That the moment must be seized to take advantage of this unique window of opportunity. Hope it's unique. I don't want to go through this again. And that for those fortunate enough to find themselves in industries naturally resilient to the pandemic, think here of big tech companies like Apple, Google, Facebook, and Amazon, the crisis was not only more bearable, but even a source of profitable opportunities at a time of distress for the majority. Biggest wealth distribution in the history of mankind happened in 2020. It was from the middle class and the lower class to the elite. Finishing more on that quote, in early July 2020, we are at a crossroads. One path will take us to a better world, more inclusive, more equitable, and more respectful of Mother Nature. The other will take us to a world that resembles the one we just left behind, but worse and constantly dogged by nasty surprises. We must therefore get it right. The assumptions this guy makes about the world we came from, he has no understanding whatsoever of how most of the world lives. And I thought about that today is, you know, these people, these quote unquote elites, this new nobility, same as the old one, they spend so much of their time in cities. And if I lived in some of Americans or any of these global cities, I would think we have too many people as well. But I've driven across the country, you know, I'm from Texas. And
Across the country.
yeah, well, you fly over the country, like 98% of the time you're looking down on places no human being's been in years. We don't lack space. We also don't lack food, which is interesting.
We don't lack anything.
Well, we lack some common sense.
Well, okay, there you go. But as far as resources, there's abundance.
So one of the World Economic Forum's many powerful strategic partners is BlackRock, which is a gigantic financial corporation. They got filthy rich. They were a player, 20 years ago. But what they did is they, during the great financial crisis, they stepped in to tell the government, hey, we'll help you manage all these bad mortgages, excuse me. And they basically did that and they got filthy rich off our taxpayer dollar. One of the things they did is, well, BlackRock is solidly behind the stakeholder model, and they create what's called the ESG model. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governmental. In financial services, there's always socially responsible investing, and it never really performed very well. But now that you have ESG, What BlackRock does is they give you an ESG rating and based on things like your diversity. Are you giving money to global warming companies? Basically everything that the woke left wants you to do. If you do it, you get a high rating, and if you don't, if you just mind your own business, you get a low rating, and then you get cut off from financing, capital, all kinds of things.
That's my point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Episode of Black Mirror.
I'm sorry.
That's an episode of Black Mirror talking about the China of the social
It's exactly
security.
talking about Black Mirror.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's a British show, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. The way this ESG model, it's really bad. It's a terrible way to invest. But because basically you're assuming that the political party that's in power today is going to win the next election. Because otherwise, a lot of those things lose value, and you get a lot more. What do they call it? What was the Solyndras? Bad investments. Governments do not make good investment decisions. I mean, that's just a fact. They never have. They never will.
Well,
The
isn't
pro-
it all just basically money laundering though?
What is it? So the concept here is what they are is a cartel. And I talked to you a little bit about cartels when I did talk about the Federal Reserve. And basically it's a public-private partnership. It's not quite the same as a monopoly. It can be a group of businesses and similar or related, and they partner up with the government. Basically they want the government to crush their competition. And basically their money funds the dirty politicians to do that. That's the Federal Reserve business model right there. Cartels exist for two reasons: maximize profits and eliminate competition. Okay, and that's what they're doing. This is cartel behavior, saying, okay, if you're socially acceptable to us, you can participate, and if you're not, if you have different political views, you're gone. So now it's political cartels, and that is not okay. None of it's okay. Quote from Think, sends out a letter to all the CEOs around the country. We have long believed that our clients as shareholders in your company, he runs mutual funds, will benefit if you can create enduring sustainable value for all your stakeholders, all these buzzwords. As more and more investors choose to tilt their investments towards sustainability focused companies, the tectonic shift we are seeing will accelerate further, and it's happening. And because this will have such a dramatic impact on how capital is allocated, every management team and board will need to consider how this will impact their company's stock. They're making threats in this letter, and there really is blackmail. There's a lot of free market issues with what they're doing, and we don't have time to go into all of them right now. But if you want to know why all these corporations have gone woke, well, it's three main reasons. It's because the ESG ratings. It's also because you've got the young global leaders who've been infiltrating a lot of the corporations as employees and stuff like that, and they've risen to levels of CEO and stuff like that. And it's a lot easier to get startup seed capital if you're connected. All you got to do is say, hey, who do I need to talk to? And you'll get your funding if you're connected. Nobody else gets to do it that easy. There's a third reason that the corporations are all getting all over. Oh yeah, one other interesting thing that happens is CalPERS, the world's biggest pension fund, what they figured out a while back is if they bought a bunch of stock in companies like ExxonMobil, which is the best example they did it on, they would have enough push to get their own activists nominated to the board of directors. So they're getting them from every angle. And then of course you have the woke HR departments coming out of our brainwashing universities. Schwab talking about stakeholder capitalism, neoliberalism. Okay. Schwab compares stakeholder capitalism to neoliberalism, which is how he calls our current system neoliberalism. Not really accurate, but that's fine. Anyways, defining the latter as a corpus of ideas and policies favoring competition over solidarity. I think competition is good. Creative destruction over government intervention. Yeah, I agree with that. And economic growth over social welfare. In other words, neoliberalism refers to a free enterprise system. Okay, where do I sign up for that? In opposing that system, stakeholder capitalism entails corporate cooperation with the state and vastly increased government intervention in the economy. Yeah, so we're basically looking at, everything he said flies in the face of legitimate economic theory. And he's basically saying no more competition, no more free markets. That's what they're saying. It's totalitarianism from a corporation, from a corporate level. ESG approved companies are not monopolies, they're cartel members. I hit that. Another way of describing this is capitalism with Chinese characteristics. Agrarian China couldn't compete in the globe in the 60s and 70s. That's why they got involved. They changed gears. They were getting their rear ends kicked on the global stage. They didn't have the money. to make their socialism work. So what China did is they temporarily privatized their economy. And that temporary could have been at least 100 years. It was going to do whatever it took to get them up to speed economically, and then they had to go back to full on totalitarianism. That's always been their plan. But now they want to give it to the whole world, which
So before you get too far away from BlackRock, Ed Dowd was also interviewed today and
talk about Ed Dowd. I'm a big fan. He's been talking about the insurance companies doing great work.
yeah, he's been kind of a whistleblower kind of guy.
Yeah, Ed Dowd's a former hedge fund manager, and he basically is tracking all the insurance companies to see who's paying out more in death benefits, and they're going through the roof.
The excess mortality.
Yeah, we just had the big one that came this week was I forget the name of the firm in Germany, insurance firm, basically saying that according to our calculations, if we extrapolate that out across, we could have had several million adverse effects from the vaccine. And this shows up on these insurance companies' bottom line, and it's too big to hide. Now that you have one big corporation that's done this, the investors are going to ask every other CEO in their earnings call, "Are you having the same problems?" They can't hide it. These numbers are too big to hide.
400% increase.
Yeah, it's interesting, but good interruption. That's actually interesting. It's good stuff.
Good time.
It's all good stuff. Okay, so the Great Reset represents the development of the Chinese system in the West, but in reverse. Whereas the Chinese political class began with a socialist political system and then introduced privately held for-profit production, the West began with capitalism and is now implementing a Chinese-style political system. It's exactly what's going on. The kind of authoritarian measures that the Chinese government used to control its population. That's what's happening. So where does this lead us? Where do we go from here? A lot of answers, but it's all happening as we speak. A lot of their stuff's been exposed, but we need a couple big wins to wake up more people. This is very scary stuff. New term, big digital. It's a communications, ideological, and technological arm of an emerging corporate socialist totalitarianism. That's what we're living through. They're going to want us. They want to give us a social credit score. They want digital IDs. They tried to use the vaccine passport.
Tied to your DNA.
They tried to use the tied to your DNA, vaccine passports, social credit scores. And the way social credit scores is very simple. If you do exactly what the state says, you can go out and use it. You can actually spend your own money and buy what you want. If you're someone like Bill here, he's not going to be able to buy food.
No,
No food, no gas.
social credit score.
Social credit score. That's why they want this digital passport so bad. This is why we demand to have physical currency. You cannot let them give you these global digital currencies or centralized digital currencies. That is the end right there. That is the biggest threat to our livelihood. It's coming. So this is going to segue into Ukraine, but this is something I've been working on this week is with these high gas prices. And of course, with Ukraine and Russia going at it, gas prices are probably going to go up again. Well, they're going to we're going to see gas lines and gas rationing. And everybody, I'd like to introduce you to your digital gas ration card. Bill, you can't drive anywhere, buddy. You're done. That's what's coming.
Well, we'd all be on that list. I mean,
Yeah, but Bill,
Bill.
well, yeah, it's more fun to throw Bill under the bus.
Yeah, it's all right, Brady. I got a few zingers that you covered.
Oh, I'm sorry, we're out of time.
That's interesting to see that people like Bill Gates buy thousands and thousands of acres all over the place
Of
because you're like,
good
okay, sure,
farmland.
I'm gonna have my own farm. Oh, no, you can't because actually you're gonna buy land. And now BlackRock is behind buying all the real estate on the back end. They want everybody to be tenants.
Just talking about the Bill Gates and BlackRock buying up all the real estate, which is absolutely true and should never have been allowed. Of course, we also have the Chinese buying up all of California and stuff like that, which should never be allowed.
Oh, the port of San Pedro is owned by China. Think about it.
Before I shift into quick little thing on Ukraine, does anybody have any questions on the Great Reset? This is a topic I could go on all night long with this stuff, and all the questions you guys are having. Everyone's pretty well read here. I don't know. Do we have the ability to get to Zoom classes? I don't think I do. I think I messed up my screen, and you guys aren't going to be able to.
I'd like to put a plug into grandjury.net. It has 23 hours as of today, day 5, or the other day was day 5, Saturday is day 6. It talks about everything that we're linked into here, it's just incredible what's going on.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of future.
What's that
Oh,
website
yeah.
again?
Huh?
Grand jury.
It's grand-jury.net. It's incredible what's going on. It's all about the Nuremberg 2.0 and trying to bring all these guys down with the
Talking-
model proceeding of the grand jury for we the people.
Talking about, and then Rob, give me his name again, the German attorney, and I
Oh,
just,
Ryan,
Weiner Fuelnick, that's it.
Fuelnick.
It's talking about the mock trial they're doing over there. It made, apparently it's fascinating.
He lives in Napoli in German. He's here in United.
He's a German guy. He also practices law in Germany and
It's mostly in
California.
English. So you get English or German.
Yes.
It's all set on grand-jury.net.
Oh, I wanted to share one last thing on the economic, one last thing on the global reset to see. I printed out the outline of what the full Great Reset game plan is. You can find this online in a PDF. They got all kinds of things planned for us. They have an economic reset, a societal reset, a geopolitical reset, an environmental reset, technological reset, and all kinds of things like taking care of inequalities, social unrest, the return of big government, the social contract. I mean, they want their fingers in every single bit of society. What are we doing for time?
We need to reinvent the Great Reset.
Well, we can get into solutions another time. So real quick on Ukraine. First of all, the timing of it's really interesting. 2 weeks ago, we were talking about Canadian truckers fighting for freedom. We're talking about Biden's declining poll numbers. We're talking about inflation. And, CBS actually came out this week and tried to blame the last year of inflation on Russia invading Ukraine. Yeah, that was great. We were talking about John Durham's investigation, which is, look, I was focusing in on Hillary Clinton. The next thing you know, we're at war with, Russia's at war with Ukraine. So, yeah, I think they tried to change the narrative. The question really is come down to, was Putin working with Biden to help them change the narrative? Was this a prearranged thing? And is Putin actually going to stop with those 2 provinces and not go any further?
Absolutely.
Well, I think he is.
I think so.
I think there's a very good chance that he's not. He may take out Kiev, but not keep it, because it is a lot harder to occupy a foreign territory than it is to take it first. And the area he's occupying right now is trying to. These are mostly Russian. These are ethnic Russians who speak Russian, have a Russian culture. They never should have been part of Ukraine in the first place. And ever since the United States helped overthrow the democratically elected president, and it's Victor. God, I had these names down earlier. I was practicing them. Okay, we'll call it the Russian Victor and the Ukrainian in the non-Russian Victor. 2004, the non-Russian Victor, which was Victor. Does it start with a P? Was it?
I think it was.
I would say it started with a Y, but
Oh,
so it was Yashchenko and something of Vitch. So, anyways, I had these memorized. The pro-West guy who's supported by the American interests, which means our dirty State Department, won the election in 2004, or the other guy won in 2004. The whole world got ticked off about it. It was a very dirty election. I mean, probably as bad as we've seen around here recently. So they ended up having a new election, and then the pro-Western guy won. He was succeeded by the guy he lost to him in 2010, and he started making inroads to be friendlier with Russia. Well, the U.S. State Department did not like that at all, and our CIA and our State Department did a color revolution. The Maiden Revolution was something our State Department staged, and I can prove that because I have a recording right here on my computer, which I'll share with anybody, of U.S. number 2 in the State Department, Victoria Nuland, talking with their Ukrainian ambassador as they were saying, okay, which of these Ukrainians can we have in the cabinet and which ones not? They were picking and choosing who they were going to install. I've got this on, I've had this thing saved since 2014. So we know this was an American coup. It was a color revolution. Well, so once they got rid of the pro-Western guy in 2014, there was a lot of fighting in the Donbass region and a couple of the others. And it's the people we installed were literally fascists. That is their ideology. These are not good people in Kiev in power, as we can tell by all the business they did with the Bidens. And we know how much money has disappeared in Ukraine for the USAID, which is State Department money laundering. We know what happened with Hunter Biden. We know John Kerry's son worked over there. Guy by the name of Cofer Black. Anybody know that name? Cofer Black was the #2 guy from Mitt Romney. He sat on the same board at Burisma as Hunter Biden. Yeah, so we got a lot of people involved in Ukraine, a lot of dirty money. Apparently, we got pictures today of Ukrainians, of the Ukrainian military burning papers in the Capitol. That happened today. A question came up earlier about the U.S. biotech labs. And who asked that question? Was he? That's Holly. So there's something going around online that there's U.S. apparently has a bunch of biotech labs in the Ukraine for some silly reason. Why would the U.S. be investing in foreign biotech? We don't do that. We don't do research. Apparently 4 months ago, both China and Russia had approached the United Nations and asked the US to stop, made a complaint about our biotech labs in Ukraine. But when those first missiles went off, what is it, about 36 hours ago now? That sound about right? If you look at a map of where those biotech labs are and a map of where the first missiles hit, there's a little bit of correlation. So I have no idea if there's anything to that or not.
Same thing in Hiroshima, it's kind of the same scenario.
How about Chernobyl? Russian already have Chernobyl in their hand, you know?
Oh, Chernobyl.
Yeah.
So that's fun. That's funny. Russians did take Chernobyl. It was really funny.
Yeah, interesting. Something is fishy for me.
One of the left.
7 out of 11 of them.
I don't know if they hit the biotech labs or not. I have no confirmation of that. I'm not going to run with it. I'm just saying it's a theory that's out there. I can't confirm or deny. So about the Chernobyl, somebody put out a story today that the Russians took Chernobyl because it was powered northern. Of course, you're going to take Chernobyl. It powers northern Ukraine, supplies all their power. Chernobyl has been closed for a long freaking time. This is a journalist did this. Actually, thought that they took Chernobyl.
In 1995.
Yeah, it's been a long time. They might have made a movie about that.
86 or something.
Yeah, something 85 or 86. I was teacher back in Hungary when we went in May sometimes, you know, and I was in the teacher room and we were like, okay. The wind bringing thoughts to us, the whole.
Well, the history of the region is really fascinating, and I wanted to talk just a little bit about that before turning it over to Bill. Anybody remember the Russian Revolution in 1917?
Oh, yeah, I remember well.
I was 3 years old.
But you all have heard of it.
Yes, we knew it.
Well, Klaus Schwab was actually there, so no, actually, nobody actually knows it because it wasn't a revolution. That was a foreign invasion. This was not Russians fighting. This was not the masses of Russia crying out against the tyranny of the czars. That's not what happened. It was a foreign invasion. It was paid for by American Wall Street bankers and British globalist
And
bankers.
They sent Lenin back.
We
They
sent
sent from
Lenin.
Switzerland to Lenin back to there, yeah.
Here's about this. These were a bunch of foreigners, or most of them were. Stalin was a Georgian, for the love of God, their president. This was not a Russian revolution. This didn't happen internally. This matters.
He couldn't speak good Russian.
I heard that same thing. Yeah, couldn't speak good Russian.
Fun
Yeah.
of him when he was a kid.
They just blew my train of thought. So I was talking about
Sorry.
it was an outside coup and everything like that. Everyone know about the Holodomor? The Holodomor.
Oh.
That's it. That was the ethnic cleansing, right?
No,
Genocide.
maybe not.
Yeah.
No, that may not have been the racist genocide you think it is. It may have. The Holodomor, more people died in the Holodomor than in the Holocaust, and it's not really particularly close. But we're not allowed. We never hear about the Holodomor, and you cannot deny anything about the Holocaust. Now, I do think the Holocaust happened.
Okay,
That's it.
who did it? Stalin?
The Holodomor.
Yeah.
The reason that many people, it was starvation throughout the Soviet Empire, and it was they had the starvation because of absolute. What's that?
Can I borrow your charger?
Which the one I'm charging on right now?
Yeah.
Kind of.
Kind of, okay.
If you're totally dead, go ahead and take it. I think I got enough juice.
I am totally.
Yeah, go ahead and take it.
Somebody wasn't here, somebody grabbed it. Another person.
So the Holodomor, tens of millions of people died, and most of it from starvation. A lot of people out there think it was ethnic cleansing. That may not have happened. It may have just been the incompetence of a socialist system that couldn't produce enough food, because the exact same kind of starvation was happening in other places like Kazakhstan, other places in the Soviet Empire. They were just brutally incompetent and couldn't feed their own people.
That's
Which-
exactly what they want Ukraine because that's the best soil, and agriculture.
Yeah,
It's-
she's talking about the soil.
Amazing.
So here's an interesting thing. We talked about this conflict is going to drive up, this conflict's going to drive up fuel prices. We're pretty certain about that, especially with not being able to produce our own anymore. Thank you.
AAA predicts 525 by next month
Oh, we'll get to $10. That's when we get their stuff.
in San Diego.
When if you
In
look
San
at the
Diego County.
numbers, Ukraine is actually the richest in nation, like in
Well,
the world.
here's
in
the point-
resources.
Here's the point I'm going to make. 25% of the world's wheat is produced in the Ukraine. What's that going to do to your food prices?
That's why he wants the whole thing, trust me. He wants the whole thing.
Maybe. A lot to be yet to be seen. And a lot of it comes down to is exactly who is Vladimir Putin? Is he in on this global reset? I mean, he's got to know about it. He's a pretty well-informed guy. Is he cooperating with it, or is he trying to say, I'm going to stay outside of it? I
think
don't,
he's maybe trying to play both sides and.
that's entirely possible. It's playing both sides.
He's brilliant and we needed Trump to somehow. This.
Well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bill Rice.
I have one.
Oh, wait,
question.
one more question on Ukraine.
Well, it kind of ties into Ukraine. It's about Hunter Biden. So supposedly the US attorney who's been calling grand jury about Hunter Biden,
Oh, yeah.
that's like heating up and that's part of why this is happening now too, is to distract from that.
Yeah, but she mentioned the Hunter Biden story is another reason to distract from it. And that's actually another story that's coming, but it wasn't, what they're really worried about is the news cycle. And the Hunter Biden stuff hasn't made it to the news cycle yet. They need to get the mainstream media to start talking about something but bad stuff. Because everything they talked about, especially the inflation, was making the Democrats look really, really bad. So,
So think about.
all right, I'm done.